And with this, we depart the teens. The number 13 player in my 50 most relevant. He held up the Premiership Cup last year, and he may have helped your fantasy side do the same. Dayne Zorko is who we are talking about on today's episode of the 50 Most Relevant. It's a list that we've curated and created this off-season and pre-season about players that I think we have to have a conversation about this fantasy footy pre-season, ranked in an order of relevance that is ultimately subjective. And whether you agree or disagree doesn't really matter, because it's my list, not yours. But would you move Zorko higher or lower? I do want to know. If you're watching this on YouTube, comment below and let me know. Joining me on this podcast is a man that's a regular part of the coaches panel, and inside the last few days has launched Finders Keepers, a brand new spin-off podcast from the coaches panel that is all about helping you in your dynasty and your keeper leagues. It is the host of it, Jordox, joining me on the podcast. Hello, mate. Congrats on the success of the podcast, and Dayne Zorko is a great player for us to talk about.
Absolutely. Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on. It's been an exciting week, a busy few days, but the pod's off the ground and looking forward to just keeping it going and making it grow and get better with every week. But speaking of, things that get better with age, Dayne Zorko, what a 2024 we got from him. I mean, wow. I knew he was a great fantasy player. He has been for such a long time. I never saw that sort of season come out of him. And I don't mean it's his best average or anything, but just at his age, to change positions at the start of the year, I'm sure you'll touch on that, and then to just become a must-have, really.
He was the forward that created the early separation for us last year. Many of us thought it'd be an Isaac Heaney that we jumped on, and rightfully so. Could see through the preseason and opening round that change of role into that midfield, and we thought that he might be the season-defining forward. I think if we look back retrospectively into 2024, it was Dayne Zorko, and your success in a season may have really just run alongside a parallel between how quickly you got your hands on Dayne Zorko into your team. A 110 average across the formats for us last year. And one of the big positional changes that shouldn't come as a surprise, but moves from that forward eligibility to a defensive eligible option for us in 2025. Just skinny of the $600,000 price point for us in SuperCoach, despite the 110 season, and over $1.1 million across AFL Fantasy and Dream Team due to such a stunning season. Last year, his season-high SuperCoach score was 161 against the Tigers. You got to go back a few years, though. Gosh, almost a decade against the Cats. 196. Oh, so close to being part of that 200 club. While AFL Fantasy, a season high, is also now a career high score in AFL Fantasy. In the Q Clash, it was against the Gold Coast Suns. Jordox, you did mention it, but an unforeseen positional change. Kitty Coleman goes down injured during the season. In fact, very early in the year, Brisbane have to pivot and adjust and make some adjustments into their team, their structure, their ball movement. And instead of Kitty, the 2023 grand final star, as their premier ball movement, they go to their former captain. And while a different type of player, he becomes so successful. And one of the key reasons that the Premiership Cup now resides under the banner of the Brisbane Lions.
Yeah, and it's a real funny one too. I mean, we'll touch on draft at the end as we usually do, but I think about drafts last year and, depending when your draft was run and done, like he probably would have gone undrafted just about, because he had forward eligibility, obviously, but, he looked like he was on the decline and wasn't going to be much value at all. And then, obviously, the awful injury that Coleman had so soon after that great grand final appearance was terrible for Brisbane. But, the silver lining was they got, as you said, the former captain back there. And, not only did he dominate the stat sheets, he dominated games. And as you said, he really helped take them on that famous charge to September.
I don't know if he would have gone undrafted, but he definitely went a lot later than he probably should have gone. on draft day because he became so critical to that playmaking. He was third for all transition points for all defenders last year in AFL Fantasy. He's the sixth best storage from stoppage player for defenders in AFL Fantasy. Ranks first in the leagues for kicks per games, fourth for marks, seventh for meters gains, 13th for effective disposals and uncontested possessions. And that's not just Dayne zipping out the back to get easy, cheap football. This is him working his tail off to get that handball received. That is him running and sprinting, creating space and separation, working off opposition forwards to be able to become an outlet kick, to be able to use the ball so well. And he really became one of the core playmakers, if not the core playmaker for them, outside of winning the ball at centre bouts and at stoppages. Last year, we talked about such a successful year, the 110 across the formats, 15 AFL fantasy tons, 6 scores over 120, including that monster 184. And importantly, alongside that, just the one poor score in AFL fantasy of a score under 80, but ranks 4th for total points overall, 2nd for all defenders, and then 6th for averages overall and 3rd for defenders. An amazing AFL fantasy year. And then in SuperCoach Jordox, almost pretty similar. The 15 tons, 7 over 120, a few more sub 80 scores, got impacted by a few games where he turned the ball over and a few tags did come his way at times. I want to get your thoughts on that in a moment. But 16th overall for points, 18th overall for averages, 4th overall for defenders by points, 5th by average. Just as you mentioned, despite getting to the game in a wheelchair, metaphorically speaking, he could not have had a better season for us.
No. And I guess, the big question, and that's what we'll go through on this chat now is, can he do it again, MJ? I mean, looking at his scores just quickly, the other beautiful thing about his season was when you look at his scoring, there's not these pockets where he went on runs. It's just all year he's got big scores just littered throughout the season. So it's not like, sometimes when players have a big average, you look at the season and you say, well, the first half of the year he was flying and then other teams worked it out and shut him down and he was a little lower. Or, on the flip, he started slow and then caught fire. No, all year he was doing it. And, talking about the cheap stats and whatnot, which obviously he's very good at, he takes a huge amount of kick-ins. The other thing that struck me when looking at his stats is he's still laying a lot of tackles. Like, he's a midfielder from way back. And there was only one game last year where he didn't lay a tackle. So, yeah, his ability to fill the stat lines in every column is, something. It was something to behold, that's for sure.
So we do have to ask that question, what does 2025 hold for him? Because everything broke the way that for Zorko to pop the 110 season, everything broke his way in terms of the role deployment, the majority share of kick-ins, that a game style that was so favourable to play through him, not just as the key distributor by foot, but also then he would use work rate to get the second and third touch in a score involvement for the Brisbane Lions. And so before we even deep dive into any of the other subtext layers that we can look at for Zorko, we know Kadeem Coleman is coming back, and if not for opening round early in the season, that's a pretty significant change of what's going to be in that defensive half, let alone if structurally they continue to evolve with players like Tom Doedee coming in the first few months of the year as well. How do you see a pathway forward for Zorko, or do you see a pathway forward for Zorko to maintain the scoring rage that he held from last year?
I can't see him maintaining it just purely for the fact that there's going to be other players taking kick-ins. So even just in a very small stat kick-ins, he took so many of them last year, and with Coleman back, they're going to have him do it. Overall, though, I don't think Coleman's going to really change and impact and steal too many points off him. You've also got Wilmot, who's developing really nicely, and I think they like what he's turning into. But I don't think they're going to go, oh, yep, Zorko, that was great for 1 year. Now you can go and sit in the forward pocket or a half forward flank. I think he keeps the role and leads from the back line the way he did in 24. But I can't see maintaining that amount of scoring with Coleman back. Even if it's a small dip, I just can't see it.
And it's interesting. It all depends how you choose to view the impact of Kadeen Coleman. If you look back at 2023 again, just purely for kick-ins for a moment. Now, there is Daniel Rich for about 6 games through there, and one of them he had an unbelievable share. I think it was like 11 or 12 kick-ins he took in that game, like unbelievable statistically. But it was Connor McKenna and Kadeen Coleman. So it's about 94 and 41. The share, and then you do have a Darcy Wilmot sitting through there taking an element of it as well. But I'm not too sure we're going to see a drastic move away from Zorko being the primary. I think we are going to see someone like a Wilmot who took about 60-odd. We see McKenna take about 40-odd. He started to become more sub and impact type, that sort of player, as the season went on. So while it might not be the 100-plus that we saw last year, I don't forecast that to drastically fall away. And I think the benefit of a player like a Kadeen Coleman is twofold. One, they're really different style of ball movement players. Zorko is much more of a shorter, sharper kick, and then he's going to use his speed and that burst of pace to then link up with the handball receive and continue on the ball movement through transition. Whereas Kadeen Coleman is more of a laser-like penetrating kick, who is a run and carry player, but is a different type of ball user. And I think for Brisbane, this is a great thing for them. I go back to a couple of games last year where teams started to tag Dayne Zorko because they realised we might be able to hamstring some ball movement here from the Brisbane Lions because he was the one wood coming out of defensive 50. I think what Kadeen Coleman does is it just diversifies their ways of moving the ball, but not to the extent that I think it clips Zorko so drastically that he's not going to score in that echo chamber of what he did last year. So, yep, Coleman comes in, uses that left boot, but now it's just another way for the Lions to hurt you. And do you want to get hurt by the penetrating left foot? Or do you want the short, sharp kicks? It's very much like what the Bulldogs used to do. Do you want Bailey Dale to cut you up with his speed and kick, or do you want it to be more the surgical cut of a Caleb Daniel who do a 25, 30-metre kick on the 45? So to me, I'm not too concerned about Kadeen Coleman as the causation of a significant scoring drop.
Yeah, I think they'll work really well together. Like you said, they play in a different way, and Coleman offers something different. And, you know, it's funny too, when you think about kick-ins, yeah, Zorko will lose some kick-ins, but that just gives him a chance to take more cheap +6s in the deep in the back pocket. So, yeah, I don't know. I like I said, I don't see it being, you know, this massive drop-off. I just can't see it being maintained. And it's not just because of Coleman. It's for a number of factors. The law of averages, age, and, you know, it's just hard. It's hard to see him doing what he did in 24 again to the same level.
Yeah. With so much breaking right for him, it's got to maintain that way and to do it early on in the season. I think there's a way it could happen, and I'll share that with you in a moment, but we are genuinely as a community getting closer to not only the community series, but feeling a little bit more stable with what we're doing at D1 than what we probably did a month ago when we were hitting the 30s and 40s of the 50 most relevant. We were looking at these premium defenders. People were going, oh, yeah, but Sheasel and positional movement, and not too sure, and Sinclair, and how are the Saints going to move the ball, and Sicily, and what are the Hawks doing with intercepts and tolls, and Lockie Whitfield's not really had great durability, and we've built these concerning walls around what we do at D1 and D2. And as understandable as those concerns have been, in that conversational piece and looking at ownership across the format, I feel really confident to continue on with my sentiment, which is I feel like we've just ruled Zorko out because 110, 39 years old. He's 36 in a couple of days, by the way, at time of recording. But we basically just go, he can't do it again. And so we disregard him really quickly and easily. I probably we're not giving him enough respect because of all these top-line defenders. He's got a really stable role. He's got shown pedigree over a number of years. He's not got some of the concerns that others do in this space. And while he does have some others that we'll address, he's just probably not getting enough consideration in the community and just getting overlooked way too easily.
Yeah. No, you're right. He is. I haven't given him a great deal of thought before today's chat, to be fair. So you're right. But I guess there is reasons, and it's...
There are.
You know, I don't know. How much do you look into the psychology of players? Like, I just think about Zork and what was driving him in 24, that, you know, such a long career without tasting the ultimate success, so close in 2023, and then to reach the pinnacle. Now, I'm not suggesting now this year, he doesn't try or he's not as good as he was last year, but there's something intangible in the motivation of a player. I think it's more of a subconscious thing anyway. People talk about the contract year. I mean, this is a guy who was probably at points last year thinking this may be it. But then, you know, the role change, he had a brilliant season. I'm going on again. And then he wins the flag. So, yeah, I just think the law of averages, the chances of a 36-year-old backing up a 110 fantasy average season, I can't see it. But I do agree, we've dismissed him way too quickly. But with the early buy and that starting price, I'm more than happy to just wait, have a look at the opening rounds. If he's doing what he was doing last year, I'll make sure I'm there. But I don't see him getting away price-wise.
So he's one of the many teams playing in opening round. There's benefit and negative to that for us. The benefit is we get a look and see, not that we need to see the role, but we do see the potential impact of players like a Coleman should he be fit for that game. The negative, of course, is we do lose them for a week during the season more than others. I guess, is there a score for you that Zorko would have to knock out in opening round, knowing you don't get the score, you'll get the compounding price movement in the subsequent games, depending on obviously the next few rounds and what he scores through there. Is there anything he can do in opening round that would change your mind, that when he gets to that Sydney matchup in round one, you go, you know what, I am going to get on the Zorko train?
It's a great question. It's a great question, and I love the question because it's such a new concept. This is only the second year we've had opening round. So last year was our first chance to have a real game for premiership points that we could, as a fantasy community, look at before finalising our squads. Previously, it would be, what if he scored 160 in a JLT game or a community series match, whatever it may be. And it's like, well, it's a pracky match. You can't read too much into these things. But you're right. What does he have to score? I mean, if he scores 150 in opening round, who are any of us to say, nah, no thanks? So I don't know. I'm nowhere near confident on my D1, D2, the setup that I have, that maybe I could be convinced by a 140, 150 in opening round. But I'd like to stay firm because you shouldn't move based on one score. But, we're only human, MJ.
Well, that is the thing. We see a monster score. If our other options that we're looking through there that maybe sit more in the value line for us don't quite hit where we want, it is those 5 or 6 days between the conclusion of opening round and the commencement of that Thursday night Richmond and Carlton game that so much information has changed for us. The challenge is guys like Coleman, Mills, Roberts, Perryman, just in the back line alone, and Holmes are the players we consider, and they are the players that are off on that bye in round 3. It's a nice matchup on paper against the Cats. The Swans in round 1 is not favourable. Then it's the Eagles in round 2. But I'm actually really intrigued by them. We'll have had one price movement in SuperCoach and Dream Team. We'll have had an acceleration of a few movements in AFL Fantasy. I think there's a world where I could very quickly endorse a jump on movement to Coleman on the not Coleman, on Zorko, on the premise that a few other variables line up. A few of your mid prices fail. You need to do something. A premium mid defender that you start gets injured. A couple of variables. Because after the bye, that month straight after it, there are some matchups here that historically and forecast-wise, I think look pretty appetizing. Straight after the bye, they play Saturday afternoon against the Tigers at the MCG. I don't think there'll be any better matchup for us this year than anyone versus the Tigers as a generalised statement. They then go to Gather Round and they play the Bulldogs. Then they go and play the Magpies at the Gabba, and then it's the Saints at Marvel Stadium, and then a few weeks later it's North Melbourne. So again, we're projecting forward off the basis of what scoring against was in 2024, and in the Tigers' case, who I think will be the easiest team to score against for us in 2025. That's as good as a run we could kind of get for running half-backs where so much of the ball movement comes through. If he's anywhere near what he was in 2024, jumping on a bit of Zorko early in 2025 might just be as critical to success as it was in 2024, albeit we're paying for it a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I liked the thought of not starting him, but being prepared to jump if it looks like he's going to do it again. Because once that early buy is out of the way and he gets that run that you've just outlined, that is the point of the year where he could take the game away from you. And we saw it last year. I mean, that 184 in fantasy against the Suns, like that was sort of early, and there are a lot of people still not sure if we believe this from Zorko. Can it keep going? And then he did that, and those who had him, like that's where those gaps start. So, yeah. Final thought would be I couldn't see me starting with him, but I'd be prepared to jump pretty early in the piece if I needed to.
Last year, we were so concerned about that injury history and age, and yet he defied that thought process, and we went there eventually. If those are the reasons you're fading again, I think you need a little bit more to it, and you're probably leaning on some of the points that Jordox made around some regression due to other variables, not just, well, he's injury prone, well, he's old, well, it's like, well, he did it last year, and the run is there early after that first bye to really ensure positivity and output for coaches. I'm of a similar sentiment of, can I start him? That early bye in correlation with players that I think I want to own at a higher value spot than him in that defensive line, let alone anywhere else. I just like a Mills as an option a little bit more. I like the option of Roberts as a little bit more. I like the potential of what a De Koning could be should he play as a ruck and not in defence. I just like a few more options in that back line more than Zorko, and at a premium point. So that's probably what tips Zorko out of starting consideration. But round 4 onwards, once that fixture starts, if the variables hold from 2024 into 2025, I'm jumping on. But on draft day, we here at the Coaches Panel will be drafting on the Keeper platform. Unrivaled customization, and you can do your single season, your dynasty, or your Keeper, and even your category leagues in there as well. Keeper is the place to draft from and for in 2025. All right, Jordox, where does he go on draft day in a single season draft? I know Finders Keepers, the podcast that you are the host of for us here at the Coaches Panel, is a Keeper and Dynasty League podcast. So we'll ask you about a keeper mindset in a moment. But single season draft, where do you see him going on draft day?
Well, I think a little bit of that, you said lack of respect for him from the classic crowd. I think we'll see a little bit of that in draft because of the age. So, look, clearly he's a D1, yeah, but yeah. I can see a lot of other D1s going before him. So, look, he'll go early, but probably not as early as he should. And yeah, I reckon he's not a bad target. If you want a really strong D1, you don't want to go early in that line. The only thing I'd say, though, is you've got to be – part of draft is knowing who you're drafting with, and that's not always possible. But if you're playing with mates and your mates are kind of casual fans, a lot of people will just draft for the average and they won't consider his age and they won't consider his history. So I don't think you could wait too long before he's snapped up. But, yeah, clearly he'll be a D1. I just think there'll be a bunch that go ahead of him.
Yeah, the likes of Sinclair, Sheasel, Whitfield are almost certainly across the formats to go. But he does feel like that right bottom of tier 1 defenders that if he falls to you in that right range, which is you don't have to spend a first or probable second round pick to secure him. If you're looking to get a top line defender, he, to me, feels like the one that's more likely to fall to you rather than you have to force to be able to get ahead of. On a keeper in a Dynasty League, though, so hard because we forecast last year was a potential final season. I'd be shocked if he comes around the mountain after this year. But a 1 year wonder of 100+ defender, still a highly valuable asset in keeper and Dynasty Leagues, isn't he?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you probably, the person who owns him, if they were thinking about it, should have looked, unless they were challenging for the flag last year, should have been looking at how can they cash in before, A, he loses forward status, and then B, he's another year older. If he's available on any, if any chance he's available in any pools, yeah, just grab him and have fun. Even if you're a rebuilding side, grab him because you'll be able to trade him to a contender. But no, he's been brilliant, and hopefully if you have him in a keeper, you've had him for a long time, and you've been through the highs and lows, and you got that one last huge year out of him. And as we've said many times, he could give you another huge year this year. So we'll see.
Yeah, he absolutely could. Look, if I was in a startup dynasty or keeper league, I couldn't advocate for him as an option inside the first 50 selections in the first 5 rounds. But once you kind of get those core options through there, that's where we start to see the diversification of strategies and structures and a bunch of different things. So I think we'll see a wild range of outcomes in startup keeper leagues, from some just going, premiership in year 1 is as good as premiership in year 5, and others going, I don't want to spend an early top 5 draft selection, not in terms of top 5 overall, but first 5 selections on a guy that I'm not going to have in another 12 months' time. So we see a bunch of different strategies on Dynasty and Keeper Leagues, that is for sure. Hey, mate, always a pleasure talking fantasy footy with you. Finders, keepers, absolutely knocking it out. I've seen it in the top 50 in the sports charts on Apple Podcasts, or Spotify Podcasts as well. So an absolute credit to you, mate, for delivering some great content. Your draft rankings is what you're doing for redraft at the moment for Keeper and Dynasty Leagues. You've just finished the Defender rankings that came out earlier this week. What line are you heading to next for us?
Yes, so the next one is a good look at the midfield. And the midfield is so interesting in keepers because it's not just about the 1 year play. It's what does the future hold? And yeah, it's been really fun trying to come up with a list, a ranking system for guys that I think will be available. And yeah, looking forward to getting that out on Monday. So stay tuned for that.
If you have not checked out Finders Keepers and you're a Dynasty or a Keeper League coach, we've got the links in the description of this episode. Every single Monday during the pre-season, a new episode is landing. It's ranking season for Finders Keepers at the moment. And then there may be some strategic conversations that come in the next couple of weeks. Not saying too much, but Finders Keepers is definitely a brand new podcast from the coaches panel that we would love for you to go and check out, especially if you're a Dynasty or a Keeper League coach. I'll give you a clue for who's number 12 in just a moment as we depart the teens and get close to single digits of my 50 most relevant for 2025. If you have just caught up on this channel, maybe the first time someone introduced you to it and you're like, oh, geez, 50 most relevant, 13. How many have I got to go? 50. friend. There's 50 in the series. And so there's well and truly almost 40 players you could go back in time and check out. You can get them as an audio podcast across Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Simply search for the Coaches Panel and subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. We so greatly appreciate it. I know it feels like a small token gesture, but actually it's a huge, important thing that helps others that are searching for fantasy footy content find the Coaches Panel. So we'd love you to do that and give us a review. If you give us a review, we'll read it out on an upcoming podcast. And if you want to, you can always watch these podcasts on YouTube. Subscribe, turn the notifications on so that as soon as an episode goes live, you get notified straight away. And comment below. Do you think Zorko is going to be as good as he was last year? Do you see a little bit of regression? You worried about Kitty Coleman or got another thought? Let us know in the comment section below. All the details of where you can get in touch with us, getting your hands on some Coaches Panel merch that Jordox is repping today. If you're watching the video, you can see those beautiful caps that are flying out the merch store at the moment. You can get some hoodies, shirts, a whole bunch of other stuff. Whether you want to get your hands on some Patreons who get some early access and exclusive access content, or you want to find the details for the Finders Keepers podcast. It's all there. It's busy in the description of this episode. You ready for the next player in the 50 most relevant? Here's a couple of clues for you. We've been doing this series now for, I think, about 8 years. I've done a total of about 10 of them, but on the Coaches Panel, I've done 8 years, I think it is, of the 50 most relevant. And I went back through historically the other day, just more out of curiosity. Who have been the frequent players that have come through as names regularly in the 50 most relevant? True story, I was just trying to see how many Josh Kellys I got in there. That's true story. That's how we got there. But as I went through the looking back of seeing who was in this 50 most relevant, there was a name that I just kept seeing year upon year upon year upon year, and always in the upper echelons. He's a player that if you don't start him in 2025, barring injury or suspension, I'd be shocked if you didn't have him at any point in 2025. A perennial top performer for us across the formats for as long as I can recall. And an unbelievably good scoring option and ranking option for us in the 50 most relevant. Who is this player? And when and how will you get your hands on him in 2025? We will talk about him tomorrow here on the 50 most relevant.